Do-do-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I'm back today with something a bit more fun after my recent flurry of content. You'll be familiar with my Dirty Dozen videos, my tier list type videos where I highlight the best characters in the game for guild raids and PvP. Today I'll be doing the opposite and talking to you about who I believe are the 5 worst characters in the game and who you should avoid investing in if possible. Now, I'm not going to do a video and just lay into 5 characters. After explaining why I believe they are bad, I'll suggest some improvements or fixes. I want to be clear, this isn't a dig at Snowprint. They are putting a lot of effort into new characters and content. As they raise the bar, some of the older characters fall further behind. It's not a unique problem to this game. Old stuff tends to get power crept and design gets better with time. All I want to do is point Snowprint in the direction of which characters need the most help. I know that they watch these videos and read the comments, so be sure to chime in with your thoughts. For this video, I'm not touching on the orcs because Snowprint have already committed to reworking them, so I want to see how the faction shapes out after the entire rework before committing them to the Feeble Five. Coming in at 5th worst is Niall, the Space Wolf Librarian. Niall immediately loses some value because he isn't a core campaign character. That means he isn't part of a core trio of characters required to progress through the campaigns. His active ability does psychic damage to a target within 3 hexes, and Niall also lays down an area of ice. This ability also stuns enemy flying units. On the surface, this isn't actually that bad. His passive then gives him bonus damage for each hex surrounding him that is covered by ice. Niall also covers a target hex in ice at the end of his attack. The problem with Niall is just how heavily he relies on the ice hex effect to be effective. This hex effect only lasts for 2 rounds, and there simply aren't many ways in the game to consistently and effectively generate this ice hex effect. Niall's kit is so dependent on ice and it just isn't a reliable effect. Additionally, despite having Terminator armor, he doesn't have deep strike, so he is hindered by his movement speed of 2. How would I fix him? I think he needs a more reliable way of gaining damage, or at least dealing consistent damage. It could be that every time he attacks an enemy on ice, the damage that he gains becomes permanent. If you're worried about this making Niall too strong, you could simply cap the damage bonus at a certain amount. Giving him Deep Strike would also give him a lot of extra usability, especially as the ice hex effect would then hinder enemy movement. Thutmose is next on the list. Thutmose again suffers from not being a core campaign character for the Necrons, which immediately puts him on the naughty step. Thutmose has okay basic attack damage but suffers from very short range. His active and passive both deal direct damage, which is great for its 100% pierce, but both have the extra text on their ability descriptions that the abilities cannot be further buffed by modifiers. That means that these abilities will not gain damage bonuses from things like Eldrion's Doom, for example. Both abilities also require Thutmose to be in close range or melee range, and this is where his weakness becomes apparent. Thutmose has very low defensive stats, and he cannot attack without exposing himself and subsequently dying. How could we fix Thutmose? Well, we could lean further into his glass cannon sort of build and increase his damage numbers slightly, but I think I'd prefer making him more survivable. It's just a little odd that he wants so desperately to be close to the enemy for his basic attack, active ability and passive, but will fold to a stiff breeze. I would also remove the no modifier text from the active and passive abilities. I have Certus as the 3rd worst character in the game, despite his usability in the core Indomitus campaign. The Indomitus campaign can be carried by Bellator or other Imperial characters with summons. Certus is just such a poor choice for investment later in the game. He has a reasonable damage stat, but suffers from being super fragile defensively. He is in the bottom 8th percentile for health and the 45th percentile for armor. That sort of makes sense for a sniper type character, but his passive is just bulky and conditional. It asks for the incoming attacks to have the number of hits reduced, and only if this criteria is met, then Certus will take reduced damage. The damage reduction isn't even that impressive, and reducing enemy hits isn't even the easiest thing to achieve. Off the top of my head, you're mainly looking at things like tall grass and big target that provide this benefit. How would I fix Certus? Well, to start with, I'd bring his stats more in line with other ranged characters, and I think his passive needs to be completely reworked. I would start by giving him a static damage reduction from ranged attacks and see if I could make the passive more interesting after that. I think you could also improve his damage type to piercing for a bit of extra oomph. It's also a bit odd that the Eliminator NPC, who looks and feels very similar to Certus, has a movement of 3. I'd bump Certus up to the same level. The second worst character I have ranked is Pestilin. He's such a weird character, and I think a remnant from when the game first came out and faction design and strategy was a bit more chaotic. His active ability gives friendly chaos units a bonus direct damage hit on their melee attack for 2 turns. Using this active eats up Pestilin's entire turn, and he doesn't even make an extra attack out of it. You can compare it to a character like Helbrecht, who does the same sort of effect but at 2 hex range, and it also lets Helbrecht make a free melee attack as part of using the active ability. Drawing comparisons with Helbrecht again, Pestilin's active only buffs chaos units, while Helbrecht's applies to any of your units. To make matters worse, this advantage is only conferred to allies within his contagion aura. Sure, there is potential for this aura to become large, but the majority of the time when you use skills in PvP, it is on turn 1 or 2, so you require your ally to be in 1 hex range to benefit, which is a particular hindrance when Pestilin only has a movement of 2. What about his passive? Is it redeeming? It gives friendly ranged units a blast damage attack on top of their existing ranged attack. In theory, this is useful against swarms, because blast damage defeats the swarm mechanic. The reality is that the passive is quite hard to sort of get right. It's only applied to adjacent allies, so position becomes important and challenging again due to Pestilin's 2 hex movement. The character seems to want to be in a melee team for his active, and then also in a range team for his passive. Neither of the abilities are particularly good per se, and Pestilin falls victim to trying to be good at a few things while being good at neither. There isn't even a redeeming quality for him, as the Death Guards are not core campaign characters who at least require some investment to progress through the game. To improve him, he needs to be entirely focused on one job, either support melee or support ranged characters. I could also suggest changing Pestilin's passive to apply to any attack, be it melee or ranged, as long as the ally is within Pestilin's aura of contagion. You might have to tweak the numbers down a little bit, but it would be great and also make him super useful against the Winged Tyrannid Prime raid side boss. Finally, the character I have listed as the worst in the game is Abaddon, War Master of Chaos. It makes me sad to put him here because a lot of people love Abaddon, and in the lore he's one of the strongest characters in the 40k universe. Sadly, he suffers from being a character who was designed from the earliest days in Tacticus, and several parts of him and his kit are now out of date. In fact, the entire Black Legion is a little bit out of date, but the others still have some nice roles. We already have established that non-campaign characters are at baseline less valuable. His defensive stats aren't good at all, especially for a character wearing Terminator armor. When you compare Abaddon to other Terminators, Abaddon has the lowest HP value among all of them. Abaddon also has the lowest armor value by far, 1.5k, with the second lowest being Niall at 2.3. Abaddon's active is bizarre, often causing him to lose health and almost kill him when it's used. I understand the original rationale. It was supposed to be a way for him to regain life when he was on the verge of death. Unfortunately, as we've just said, Abaddon isn't quite tanky enough for that scenario to come up very often, and he just dies before we can heal up. His passive gives chaos units bonus damage when they are adjacent, which I guess is fine. 499 at level 50 compares poorly with other buffers like Calgar, Eldryon and Aethana. This buff is also super narrow, only affecting chaos units, unlike the aforementioned characters. Even Shadowsun, who has a passive that is most similar, confers her damage buff to all ranged units, regardless of faction. The last little bit of text is even more specific and narrow. Abaddon essentially gives the Black Legion an extra hit on their attacks when their faction trait is triggered, so an extra hit 50% of the time, basically. The entire Black Legion faction could probably do with an update, but Abaddon strikes me as the most egregious offender. Abaddon seems a reasonably easy fix if you want to do it without too much effort. First, give him defensive stats that match the other Terminator armor wearers. Then, remove the bit of text in his active that says his health is set to a fixed amount, and instead just let it heal him. His passive could also apply to all units adjacent, and then you could double the passive bonus or give a further bonus to Chaos units, kind of like what Calgar does with his passive. If you want to get even more creative, then you could rework Abaddon's passive entirely to be a bonus to match the 40k lore. You could have some sort of rotating Chaos God Blessing, but this would be quite a big rework. There you go, the Feeble Five. Do you agree or disagree? I want to reiterate that I recognize Snowprint has done a lot of things that require developer time, so I understand that character reworks have been a little bit on the back burner. I just want this video to be something a little fun and hopefully help us guide them towards characters that need looked at the most. That's all I've got for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you are a newer player who hasn't yet used their referral code, I'd love if you could enter mine as shown on screen. It earns you 100 Blackstone and supports me in the work that I do. It is single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi.